right? So it animates
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
Um, I just had to say that. That's what I think.
No. I think, and it sounds intuitively correct. So we got noticing, we got affirming, and then you had needed. You need to make people feel needed.
Yeah, this is hard for people to. This is the hardest one for people to understand. But
Okay.
when people feel replaceable, they will act replaceable,
Right.
and
Right.
when people feel irreplaceable, they'll act irreplaceable. Especially in work, we have this bizarre, comforting survival mechanism where we say, "Oh, don't forget that you're replaceable," and that's not empowering, right?
No.
No human being is replaceable.
Hmm.
Skills may be replaceable, but human beings in their fullness, their personalities, their unique strengths, their unique gifts are not replaceable. So feeling needed is making sure that we feel indispensable, that we feel irreplaceable. A lot of people, when I ask what moment in your life brought you the greatest sense of mattering, I would say about half the people say things like when I became a caretaker for a loved one who was sick,
Okay.
or when I became a parent, or a caretaker for a child. And why is that? Well, human beings were built to be needed,
Hmm.
right? We are at our best, actually, when people rely on us.
Right.
If you think about all of the stories of heroism, what is heroism? Heroism is a human being who's needed and rises to meet that need,
Right.
right? That's why we allure ourselves to stories like that, the
Hmm.
hero
Hmm.
story, right? All about feeling needed. Um, and when we're relied on, it's powerful. So one of the practices is 5 words, and if it's saying to somebody, "If it wasn't for you,"
Ooh.
and describing how you rely on them. And think about the last year of our lives, the last 2 years, last three
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there's someone that really helped you get through your week, your year, your day, take a moment to say, "Hey, Derek, if it wasn't for you," and show them what the significance of their presence.
Yeah.
Miss people when they're gone. If someone wasn't at a meeting because they were at a vacation, instead of being like, "Hey, hope you enjoyed your vacation,"
Yeah.
you can say, "Hey, we really missed you. I'm glad you had a vacation. I'm glad you rested. We really missed you. We could have really used your creativity in this meeting
Hmm.
that we had. Come into my office. I want to show you what we talked about. I'd love to get your ideas." Right? Make someone feel needed, relied
Hmm.
on. Here's how this works psychologically. If I was like, "Derek, hey, do you want to come to a dinner party at my house tomorrow night?" And if you were like, "Yeah, I'll come," to be nice, and then you wake up tomorrow morning and you're like, "You know what? I'd prefer not to come."
Yeah.
How easy is it for you to get out of that? Easy. But if I was like, "Hey, Derek, I want you to come to this dinner party tomorrow night. I need you to bring dessert." And you wake up tomorrow morning and you're like, "I don't really want to go to this dinner party, but Zach needs me to bring
Hmm.
dessert." How hard is it for you to get out of that? Very hard,
Yeah.
right? When we feel
Yeah.
needed, we
Yeah.
emotionally commit. And one of the biggest like talent and labor problems right now, I think, is that people who feel replaceable are acting replaceable, and leaders are suddenly surprised.
Sure. 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 You know what? You know what's hitting me about all this, and this is no disrespect to the work. It's not complicated. Sure, it's not. I mean, this is not rocket science. It's all very common sense. When you say it now, it's clearly not common practice. And I
Yeah,
can think
it's
of
not.
half a dozen people I would say if it wasn't for you, or I'm going to say if it wasn't for
Yeah.
you too. But yeah, it's really obvious when you see it.
Yeah, and for so long we've relied on intuition
Yeah.
to be good to each other. But intuition doesn't scale. It doesn't scale
Okay.
in organizations, it doesn't scale in societies. What scales are practices and skills.
Right.
So I think we've matured as a species to the point now where we can turn this intuitive idea of being good humans and we can teach people how to be good humans.
Right. Right.
We spend so much time in our educational systems and in our training and development programs teaching people what to do as human beings,
Sure.
and not enough time teaching people how to be human beings. And I think we need to turn the skills of making sure people feel noticed, affirmed, and needed into hard skills and practices that are expected, that are measured, and that people are held accountable for. And I think that's what will revitalize our organizations and our communities and our lives. Because again, If someone doesn't feel like they matter, it's impossible for anything to matter. People will not care about solving your problems if people don't feel cared for
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
And I think we need to tap into this primal need.
Now, one of the things that always strikes me when you start talking about those fundamental needs that we have is how literally everything is connected to everything. Everything is kind of intercorrelated. And you made a reference earlier on. You said, and it may have been before we came on air, and you said that, oh yeah, there is no mattering without emotional intelligence. Can you expand a little bit on that? How do you see that whole thing connecting up?
Yeah, I mean, all of this relies on awareness.
Okay.
Awareness of ourselves, awareness of our thoughts, awareness of our emotions, awareness of how, like you said, how we're showing up in a space. For example, like the awareness, let's just do a small example. You're walking into a public bathroom. The awareness that you are not just a passive recipient of that public bathroom, but an active constructor of that space with the janitor who's in there to you.
Yeah.
That level of awareness is necessary to prompt the action of looking at that janitor and saying thank you.
Okay.
Right? So that awareness is a prerequisite. And being able to see and sense if someone doesn't feel seen is a competency of emotional intelligence, being able to see and sense someone other's emotional affect, and then offering an action to affect that emotional affect. The skill and the state of emotional intelligence must be developed along with the skills to create mattering, in my opinion.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, one of the things that makes with our clients, one of the things that makes emotional intelligence so compelling is when you assess the way people are showing up right now, and you hold it up and you say, here's what they're seeing, here's what they'd like to see, here's what they're actually seeing. Have you seen folks actually measure mattering? Because it strikes me that if Derek is running a team and you hold up a mirror to him that says, here's the way people are seeing you from a mattering perspective, that's likely to be fairly motivational.
Yeah, there's a few ways. I mean, one of the ways is I have an assessment. I can actually send you a draft of it, a version of it, where people can self-assess themselves first on the frequency at which they're doing the behaviors under the noticed, affirmed, and needed model. So you can get your own score. And it's not how good of a person you are or how good of a leader you are. In fact, that's not important. What's important is that you become aware of how often you're doing these things.
Sure.
But then we also have a team assessment that assesses the team on if you're doing those things.
Wow.
And that helps you become aware of that potential gap. There is also, if you want to do something that's public domain right now that you can use immediately, the general mattering scale developed by sociologists. Well, it was developed by actually a Ph.D. student and then used by sociologists Rosenberg and McCullough in the 1980s. And it's called the general mattering scale.
Okay.
And it asks things like, how important do you feel you are to other people? How much do you feel people pay attention to you? How interested are people generally in what you have to say? How much do people depend on you? You can see the noticed, affirmed, and needed coming out of that.
Sure.
And it's on a Likert scale. And it's something that you can deploy. I encourage you to deploy these items within organizational assessments. Again, we like to measure things like engagement, but engagement is a lagging indicator. People aren't going to be emotionally attached to an organization, which is what engagement is, if they don't feel like they are worth anything to the organization.
Right.
So it's a leading indicator, and it can be powerful to get a pulse on this leading indicator. So that's what I would recommend, and that general mattering scale is available. You can just Google that and find the items.
I'm just curious, is that Rosenberg who was the author of that, the same Rosenberg who back in the 60s did that? No? Did the study with the school kids where they went into the teachers and told them, hey, here are the gifted kids. Because of you remember that one? I forget what they called it. It was the...
I'm not sure it was the same one. I'll have to double check that.
Yeah, no, just curious. If it's possible for you to talk about, let me just, I made reference to it when you were coming in, that you've just come back from talking to 200 of the top leaders in the US Army about mattering. Now, people like me who haven't had much of a connection with the armed forces would have a cliched view of what it's like in there. It's probably like Jack Nicholson in what was it? You know the one I'm talking about. you doesn't matter anyway. But anyway, the hard ass sergeant major
Yep.
type, and yet they're interested in this construct. What is there anything we can learn from what they're doing and the interest they're taking?
Well, first thing I'll say, it was the most respectful, appreciative, inquisitive, and curious audience I've had the opportunity to work with.
Wow.
And they really cared about this. And why is that? Well, the stakes are really high.
Sure.
If their teams don't trust each other, people could die. If their teams don't create interpersonal relationships, the stakes are incredibly high. So I was blown away, really inspired by this group of people, and they really care about this. And there's a couple of things to think about with regard to the armed forces. Most of the work is not, oh, we're going to go out there and have a war.
Yeah.
Most of the work is routine, sometimes mundane work, working on a purpose that hopefully the country will never need. So think about that.
Sure.
So you're
sure.
doing work every day preparing for something you hope you'll never be needed for. And we get a lot of people who just graduated high school. We get a lot of people who are enlisting because they want to learn skills and they couldn't find another place that would enlist them.
Right.
And so the Army actually reaches a population that's very vulnerable to antimattering. And so that's one part of it. But the other part of it is that the core of trust. I mean, there are 4 predictors of trust on teams. You have care, and that's the first one.
Okay.
And if that one's not there, almost nothing else happens. Do people care about me? Are people capable? Are my leaders capable?
Yeah.
Are they consistent? And do they create safety, emotional, psychological, and physical safety? But the first one, researchers find if that care is not there, none of the other ones matter.
Right.
So that mattering and the notice, affirming, and needing model helps people to learn really, and this sounds a little bit silly, how to care and how to turn that into a hard practice that if you're a leader in the U.S. Army, you are expected to care in these ways, just as you're expected to operationally excel in these ways.
Okay.
And once we can get there, it's incredibly powerful. Because in like the armed forces, I think a lot of times in like other areas, we've relied on intuition, again, like I said, to lead. Like, this person's a good people leader, let's promote them. But again, intuition doesn't scale. I think the need has been realized to turn these things into hard practices.
Right.
And Simon Sinek says something really interesting about the military as I was reflecting on my time with them. And he said that sometimes in business, we sacrifice other people for ourselves, but in the military, we're sacrificing ourselves for other people that we'll never meet.
That's something.
And I think that that's why it was so powerful, and this message of mattering was so powerful for this group, because the stakes are really, really high, and the stakes of creating anti-mattering on a team are really high.
Yeah.
And I would argue they're really high everywhere.
Sure.
We know adolescent depression and anxiety has a predictive effect. Mattering has a predictive effect on reducing those. We know that people's stress levels. There was a researcher in Tennessee. I can't remember his name. I'm trying to remember the name. They studied 1,000 Tennessee residents, age 22 to 64, and they hooked them up. They measured bodily like cortisol levels, like it was objective cortisol levels, stress levels, and what they found was low feelings of mattering actually increased biological responses to stress. They developed a predictive link to that. So it's huge. It's huge everywhere, and I think it's essential everywhere. But the military, the stakes are so high, it just really brought it home.
Makes sense, and I love that Cynic thing. I hadn't thought of it, but he absolutely nails it. The difference between the two environments, you know. We are about 6 minutes away from the end. Now, I have a couple of other questions that I'd be pleased to ask you, but it's such a big topic, and you're closer to it. How is there anything that you'd like to throw into these few minutes that really feels important to you that we haven't touched upon yet in this topic?
Yeah, I would say that the key, there's another part of this, which is the belief that you matter to create mattering, right? We have to believe that we have the capacity, truly believe that we have the capacity to affect other people. There was a recent study came out, I posted it on LinkedIn a few weeks ago on how it found that we tend to underestimate how powerful random acts of kindness can be on other people.
Right. Right.
But when those same people were surveyed on the effect of the random act of kindness, it was incredible. It was far more than the person who was doing the act predicted it would be. And I think sometimes this subtle belief that we don't quite matter for ourselves can actually restrict us from doing very small acts like noticing and seeing people that have a huge impact on other people. So a couple of things as other people are, as all the people that are listening to this are going to start creating mattering for you, as you're waiting for that to happen, some of the things you can do for yourself to develop a mattering mindset is to have a so that mindset, right? So think about what you're doing on a daily basis and make sure that you can answer the so that. For example, I'm on this LinkedIn Live so that just one person out there can experience mattering. Or make sure that you know the answers to the questions of, if you're having trouble doing something, feeling unmotivated, say, what would happen to a human being if I did not do it? In our research with janitors, one of the things that they do to cope with a really difficult environment is they tend to imagine their absence.
Yeah.
And when we think about our absence, we often realize the significance of our presence. So, developing that mindset for yourself, I think, is really powerful. That will enable you to take action on some of the things we've talked about today.
Great. Big topic, and much bigger than an hour can possibly accommodate. Folks, the book obviously is on purpose, but there is a really great blog post on Zach's blog that talks about everything he's spoken about today and cites all of the research and gives you loads and loads of reading on this stuff. And again, it's just as accessible as his writing in the book. And we will try and convince him into coming back when the book does ultimately come out. So folks, I leave that there for a couple of seconds so that you can pick up the, scan the code or just take down the address. But meantime, I want to thank you very, very much. It's a fascinating topic. I'm really, really anxious behind the scenes to kind of dive into it a little bit more, because it's just so big. It just feels like a connector or like oil in the machine or something. It just feels like a big concept. It's stunning that you're almost, with the exception of researchers, you're like a lone voice kind of crying in the wilderness about that, which is great for you, and it's terrible for us. But yeah.
Well, I think what happens is people hear about it and they're like, oh yeah, we should value people.
Yeah.
Or, oh yeah, we should create mattering.
What's next?
Right, like, yeah, that's cool. Let me like it on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But when
absolutely.
I get to the question of what's on your to-do list today, show it to me.
So that.
And no actions to create mattering strategically are there.
Yeah.
That's where I say we have a lot of work to do.
Wow. Well, on that note, let me say thank you very much. And please, if you do have a minute or two, I know you're under pressure probably, but if you do have a minute or two, hang around. If you don't, that's cool. Really, really appreciate it. And we will hook up with you again. So thanks a million. And thank you a million to those folks, those of you who hung on in through the couple of blips that we had. If you missed anything in the middle of it or you've come into it late, we're going to be doing a stitching job, pulling together the entire recording, and we'll publish that in all of the usual places. Next time on Genos Live, which is 2 weeks from now, because I'm actually out meeting the man next week, we have Ben Palmer, who is the founder and CEO of Genos International, and he's going to be talking about the next generation. Where is emotional intelligence going right now? And there is nobody better placed to be able to give a sense of what's it going to look like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. So I think a really, really well worthwhile session to grab. Make sure that you're signed up. We send you the reminders. You have let me get out of the way of that. You have the QR code on there so that you're able to scan, and we'll sign you up and we'll send you out reminders each week. Or you can just go to genosemotionalintelligence.com/live. So once again, we are 30 seconds away from finishing, and I want to get you out on time, as I promised I would. Wishing you all the very best, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Not next week, but in 2 weeks' time. And all the very best. Take care.